Good morning, Europe. It's Tuesday, the 4th of January. Let's start by looking at our top stories.
Heated debate in the French National Assembly over the issue of mandatory vaccinations to access trains, restaurants and other public venues. Lawyers for Britain's Prince Andrew want a civil suit against him dismissed after details of the settlement between his accuser and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein are released. And former Silicon Valley superstar Elizabeth Holmes is convicted of defrauding investors in her blood testing startup Theranos.
Lawmakers in France remain at loggerheads over the issue of freedom versus mandatory vaccinations for restaurants, cinemas and train journeys. A lengthy debate over a proposed bill to change a health pass which accepts a negative COVID test into a vaccination-only pass has been suspended. But the government's determined to get the remaining 5 or so million citizens who are unvaccinated jabbed.
If we are succeeding, it is because we have a vaccine. The French have not been mistaken. By tomorrow, 53 million will have received at least their first injection. 1 year after dear Morissette received her injection, 53 million. Who would have believed a year ago that such a large number of French people would be convinced by the vaccination? We must salute this.
While the pass issue is ongoing in France, in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is pushing hard for a majority take-up of the booster shot as the answer to soaring Omicron cases.
Think about the requirements under Plan B, but also get the booster. And I think that's the difference between the UK and so much of the rest of Europe and perhaps the rest of the world. We have a very, very high level of vaccination now, and we need to continue very fast.
Yeah.
In Denmark, scientists are examining vaccinated blood samples to determine what can be done for those who've had a jab and yet still haven't developed a high enough immunity. It's a worldwide project. Meanwhile, in Germany, opponents to COVID-19 measures and vaccinations continue their weekly silent march through an eastern district of Berlin. These Monday protest walks have been increasing in recent weeks.
This is expected to be a lengthy debate. We could see the debate and the vote go well into Tuesday and potentially even into Wednesday. The pass is expected, if approved, of course, by the lower house of Congress and then the Senate. The pass is expected to come into effect in the second half of this month. But what we saw so far was a heated discussion. The parliamentary session started at around 3 p.m. local time here in the French capital, with the health minister speaking about the moment the country is in. Olivier Véran talked about these two fights, simultaneous fights against two waves of coronavirus infections. Of course, the Omicron variant, but also that of the Delta variant, still very much present here in this country, and defended the government's strategy here, saying that vaccination is the key element. He also said that the government's objective is not to restrict liberties and to force people into getting a jab, but to save lives. Of course, that was not the opinion of the opposition here in this country, notably the far left, Les Insoumis. The leader of that movement took to the podium and spoke at length, accusing the government of indescribable chaos and of restricting people's liberties and forcing people into getting a job. Jean-Luc Mélenchon spoke right after Olivier Véran and said that he would file a motion against the bill, but he is very unlikely to be successful. The government of Emmanuel Macron still has a majority in the lower house of Congress, and there is a sense here in this country that this vaccine pass will indeed be approved in the lower house and then on Wednesday in the Senate.
Lawyers for Britain's Prince Andrew are hoping a judge in New York will agree with them in deciding there is no case to answer in sexual abuse allegations against the royal. According to a newly presented document, the plaintiff, Virginia Joffrey, accepted $500,000 in 2009 to settle her lawsuit against the late American financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, and anyone who could have been included as a potential defendant.
His lawyers contend that this settlement agreement between Epstein and Joffrey actually protects him because it claims that anyone who could possibly be a defendant in the lawsuit she brought against Epstein can't be sued.
Joffrey has brought a civil case against Prince Andrew, alleging that he sexually abused her when she was a teenager. She says Epstein flew her around the world for sexual encounters with numerous men, including royalty. Joffrey's lawyers say the wording in her settlement with Epstein is irrelevant in her lawsuit against Andrew, in part because he isn't mentioned and because he didn't know about it. They are also arguing that he is not subject to Florida's jurisdiction. Prince Andrew has denied all allegations of sexual abuse against Joffrey. Our reporter Susan Tehrani has more from New York.
A sealed settlement between a woman accusing Prince Andrew of sexual assault and Jeffrey Epstein was made public on Monday after lawyers of the British royal pushed for the release of the document ahead of a Tuesday hearing. Today, a judge in New York will hear oral arguments on whether or not to toss a sexual assault and battery case against Prince Andrew by Virginia Joffrey. She is the woman who signed that private agreement with Jeffrey Epstein more than a decade ago. Lawyers of Prince Andrew argue that that deal shields their client from any lawsuit. However, Virginia Joffrey's lawyers argue that that pact was never intended to provide legal cover for Prince Andrew or anyone else for that matter. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for Euronews.
Disgraced Silicon Valley founder Elizabeth Holmes has been found guilty of defrauding investors in her failed blood testing startup Theranos. She was cleared of 4 counts relating to defrauding patients, and the jury was deadlocked on 3 other charges. Once hailed as the world's first self-made female billionaire, Holmes claimed the company had developed technology that could detect hundreds of diseases and conditions using just a few drops of blood. At its peak, Theranos was valued at some $9 billion and attracted investors including media mogul Rupert Murdoch and former statesman Henry Kissinger and George Shultz. The case has put Silicon Valley's fake-it-till-you-make-it startup culture under scrutiny. Holmes faces up to 20 years in prison for each count, although legal experts say she's unlikely to receive the maximum sentence. She'll remain free on bond while awaiting sentencing.
The world's biggest furniture seller, Ikea, is increasing its prices by around 9% this year. The iconic Swedish retailer blamed higher costs caused by global supply chain issues. Inca Group, which owns and operates most Ikea stores worldwide, said the increase in retail prices will help to offset significant transportation and raw material costs. It claimed that despite the increases in these costs during the pandemic, Ikea had managed to keep prices largely stable. As those costs continued to surge, the group said it could no longer absorb the damage to its bottom line. In a statement, Ikea Retail said, "Unfortunately now, for the first time since higher costs have begun to affect the global economy, we have to pass parts of those increased costs on to our customers." The statement went on to say the move will ensure Ikea's competitiveness and resilience, and that affordability will always be a cornerstone for them. UK newspaper The Guardian, which first reported the news, estimated that some prices have increased by as much as 50% since Christmas.
You're watching Good Morning Europe. Much more to come on the programme. We'll be back in a few moments.